On the store shelf, televisions pretend to be rivals. Different logos, different casing colors, different advertising slogans. Panasonic promises quality, Toshiba appeals to tradition, a private label brand tempts with price. For the consumer, it looks like a choice between competing technologies. In reality, this choice increasingly concerns not technology, but narrative. Beneath the surface operates the same industrial mechanism: shared hardware platforms, mass OEM production, and the logic of global supply chains. Vestel is one of the main operators of this system, a factory that does not sell emotions but infrastructure. This episode will show how this mechanism works from the inside. First, on the technological level, why different brands look and behave in the same way. Then on the business level, how cooperation with a global brand such as Panasonic actually functions. Finally, on the retail level, how chains such as Auchan and Carrefour build their own low-budget televisions. This is not a story about fraud. It is a story about how the consumer electronics market really works. Imagine an ordinary evening. You come home and turn on your new television. The first startup takes several dozen seconds. A familiar setup wizard appears on the screen. The same Wi-Fi icon layout. The same remote pairing process. The same transition animations. You feel as if you have already seen this before. A few days later, you visit a friend. A different brand, a different logo, a different casing. You take the remote in your hand, and suddenly a strange sense of déjà vu appears. The menu looks similar. System responses are almost identical. Even the way the app list scrolls resembles your own television. This is not an accident. It is the effect of deep standardization of the TV market, which over the last decade has changed the way televisions are built. Today, we increasingly deal not with unique projects created from scratch by individual brands, but with hardware platforms produced at scale by specialized suppliers. One mainboard, one controller set, one system on chip, and one system architecture go into dozens of models from different brands. On the marketing level, this is competition. On the electronics level, it is a shared base. The heart of a modern smart TV is not the logo on the frame, but the mainboard and chipset. In the budget and mid-range segments, the same processor families dominate: Allwinner, MediaTek, and M-Logic. These chips are designed for mass production, low power consumption, and sufficient performance for video streaming. OEM manufacturers buy them in huge volumes, build complete platforms around them, and offer ready solutions to brands. The result is simple. Two televisions from different manufacturers may have the same processor, the same amount of RAM, the same image controller, and practically the same hardware limitations. The differences visible to the consumer begin only at the software level, and even here, brand freedom is limited. The base remains the same system: Android TV, Google TV, or a Linux-based smart platform. The supplier prepares the firmware core: drivers, panel support, networking layer, video decoders. The brand adds its own boot logo, changes interface colors, adds a few partner applications, and sets default shortcuts on the remote. From the user's perspective, it looks like a completely different product. From the engineer's perspective, it is the same base with cosmetic modifications. The most visible symbol of this standardization is the remote control. The same button layout, the same Netflix and YouTube shortcuts, similar mechanical click feel. This happens because remotes are produced in bulk within a single hardware platform. Often the only difference is the printed logo. In extreme cases, a remote from one brand can control a television from another without any configuration. This is not compatibility magic. It is proof of a shared technological backbone. An even more ruthless place where the marketing mask falls is the service menu. This is a hidden technical panel that the ordinary user is not supposed to open. There you see mainboard identifiers, platform names, firmware IDs, and production codes. In many cases, it turns out that a television from a well-known brand uses exactly the same platform as a model sold under a different logo. For the manufacturer, this is convenience. For the consumer, it is a surprise. Similar patterns appear in update cycles. When different brands release system patches at roughly the same time, this is not coincidence. The update is created at the level of the shared system base and only later adapted to specific brands. That is why security patches, app changes, and Android updates often arrive in waves covering many brands at once. Image processing also looks similar. Although panels may come from different suppliers, scaling algorithms, upscaling, HDR processing, and noise reduction belong to the same platform. If hardware and firmware are shared, the image character also starts to converge. In practice, this means that televisions from different brands can present nearly identical color profiles, contrast behavior, and sharpness. In the store, this standardization is invisible. A wall of televisions creates the impression of enormous diversity. 20 brands, dozens of models, hundreds of commercial names. But beneath this visual mosaic, there are often 3 or 4 hardware platforms replicated at mass scale. Diversity is marketing. The technological core is shared. Why does this system work? Because most customers buy with their eyes. They choose a logo, frame design, promotional price, and advertising slogan. Few people ask about hardware platforms, chipsets, or firmware origins. Marketing sells a brand story. The supplier sells electronics. Each element of this arrangement does its job. For the consumer, this means one crucial shift in perspective. When buying a television, you increasingly do not choose a unique technology of a specific company. You choose a configuration of a shared platform, panel type, number of ports, service support quality, update speed, and warranty policy. The logo stops being a guarantee of technological uniqueness. This is not fraud. This is not a secret cartel. It is a natural consequence of production globalization, cost pressure, and industrial standardization. But to truly understand why this mechanism works, one must step back and look wider, not at brands, but at the entire ecosystem of OEM suppliers who actually produce the world's electronics. The best known among them, such as Vestel or Foxconn, are not exceptions. They are part of a global map of factories that do not sell their own legend but other people's logos. Over the last 2 decades, a new type of player has emerged, the infrastructural manufacturer, a company that does not build relationships with consumers but with brands. Its customer is not the viewer of a TV commercial but the corporate procurement department. These are the entities that order hardware platforms, mainboards, and complete devices ready to be branded with any label. The most famous example of this model are Asian giants. Foxconn produces electronics for Apple, Sony, Microsoft, and dozens of other brands. Pegatron, Compal, and Wistron build laptops, monitors, and networking equipment that reach the market under foreign names. For the average user, these companies do not exist. For global industry, they are the production backbone. China has for years become the center of this world, but it is not its only pillar. More and more production flows outside the Middle Kingdom to Vietnam, India, Malaysia, Mexico, and Turkey. The reason is simple: trade wars, geopolitical tensions, sanction risks, and the desire to shorten supply chains. And this is where the Middle East and Turkey appear as a new zone of industrial intermediation. The most recognized player in this region, Vestel, operates in this system similarly to Foxconn in East Asia, but with different geography and a different role. Turkey has become for Europe a production base closer to home, shorter transport routes, lower customs risk, easier logistics. Additionally, the country has been building its own industrial base through groups such as Arçelik, owner of Beko, and Grundig, which together with Vestel create a regional consumer electronics production bloc. This arrangement fits into a broader process of shifting factories from one global center to several influence zones. China remains a giant, but its production monopoly is cracking. Turkey, Southeast Asia, and Latin America are becoming alternative hubs. In parallel, another pole operates, American OEM suppliers such as Jabil and Flex. They serve production for U.S. companies, the military sector, automotive and industrial electronics. Their factories are spread across Mexico, Eastern Europe, and Asia. It is another face of the same model. The brand designs the product, production goes to an infrastructural contractor. As a result, a world has emerged in which the logo on the casing increasingly rarely means a factory and increasingly often means a contract. Panasonic, Toshiba, private labels, tech startups all swim in the same ocean of OEMs. Vestel is one of these nodes. It is not unique. It is the European Middle Eastern counterpart of Asian production giants. And only in this context does the real picture of the TV market appear. Not as brand competition, but as rivalry between production platforms and industrial influence zones. For Europe, Vestel is attractive because it offers production closer to the end market, with shorter supply chains than China and fewer customs barriers. For Turkey, Vestel is a tool of technological and export independence. For global brands, it is a cheap and stable production base. Vestel's clients are not ordinary consumers. They are brands, retail chains, distributors, and OEM platforms. Vestel produces for well-known brands sold as Panasonic, Toshiba, or Sharp in Europe, for retail chains selling televisions under their own labels, and for no-name brands that exist only on store shelves and in promotional leaflets. In practice, this means that a television with a famous Japanese logo and a television with a retail chain logo may come from the same production line, have the same mainboard, the same base firmware, and almost identical technical parameters. They differ in casing, branding, and service policy. Vestel operates in three main segments. In the low-end segment, it produces mass-budget platforms, cheap smart TVs, retail models, devices sold in promotions where price, scalability, and production speed matter most. In the mid-range segment, Vestel offers more refined configurations with better panels, more stable software, HDR support, and more ports. This is where most models sold under known brands in Europe belong. The premium segment is the smallest because Vestel does not compete directly with top OLED or QD-OLED panels. Instead, it delivers platforms that brands can dress with more expensive components and sell as semi-premium with higher-class marketing but an industrial core. This model fits into a broader geopolitical game. Turkey has for years built trade relations with China while trying not to become fully dependent on it. Within the new Silk Road, Turkey has become one of the logistics corridors connecting Asia and Europe. Through its ports, railways, and logistics centers flow electronic components, semi-finished products, and finished modules. Vestel benefits from this arrangement. Some components come from Asia, assembly happens in Turkey, distribution goes to Europe. This shortens delivery times, bypasses some trade barriers, and builds an advantage over manufacturers fully dependent on Chinese factories. Therefore, Vestel is not just a factory. It is part of Turkey's industrial strategy, a way to maintain the country's position in global value chains. And here we return to your living room. When you buy a television with a famous brand logo or a private label model from a retail chain, you often buy exactly the same production platform. The difference lies in narrative packaging. One sells the story of Japanese engineering, the other sells low price. The electronics inside can be the same. This is the real face of the modern TV market. Not a war of technologies, but a global game of production platforms, logistics, and industrial policy. Your television does not need to be unique to work well, but your awareness of where it comes from and how it is made changes the way you see the entire market. Because in the world of modern electronics, you increasingly do not buy a brand. You buy a fragment of a global system. How does this look in practice? Imagine a typical business scenario. Panasonic wants to introduce a new mid-range TV series to the European market. The company has a recognizable brand, distribution network, retail relationships, and marketing. It does not have a reason to maintain full production infrastructure for a segment where margins are shrinking. At this moment, Vestel enters the scene. The process begins with business specification, not technical design. Panasonic defines target retail price, market segment, smart TV system requirements, image standards such as HDR and HDMI count, and casing design expectations. Vestel responds with a hardware platform proposal suggesting specific mainboards, chipsets, RAM and flash configurations, showing which components are available at scale, what unit costs are, and what technological compromises are necessary to stay within budget. Negotiation begins. Panasonic pushes for better image quality and system stability. Vestel protects production cost and scalability. Every extra HDMI port, better panel, or larger RAM increases unit cost. In the background market, pressure operates continuously. Competition from other brands, retail promotions, and consumer expectations. When the platform is approved, Vestel prepares prototypes. System stability, app compatibility, remote operation, menu responsiveness, and image processing are tested. Panasonic does not build electronics from scratch, but keeps control over how the product behaves from the end-user perspective through software adjustments, image profiling, factory presets, and selected batch quality control. Mass production then takes place on Vestel's side. Vestel handles mainboard assembly, panel integration, final testing, and outbound logistics. Panasonic takes the finished product and handles marketing, distribution, warranty service, and retail relationships. Profit sharing is asymmetric. Vestel earns on volume and scale with low unit margins compensated by mass orders. Panasonic earns on brand value, retail price, and perceived quality. That is why the same hardware sold under a known logo can cost more than an identical platform under a private label. Quality control in this model is not manual inspection of every unit by Panasonic engineers. It relies on production audits, batch testing, and certification procedures. It is a statistical system, not a craftsman one. This means quality is stable enough for the mass market, but not comparable to niche premium manufacturing. The most interesting part is responsibility for problems. When a firmware bug appears, the user sees Panasonic's logo. Complaints go to Panasonic. Media pressure hits the brand. Meanwhile, technical fixes are often developed on Vestel's side, which updates the base system and passes patches to the partner. For the consumer, this division is invisible. Behind the television stands a chain of entities: platform designer, mainboard manufacturer, panel supplier, system integrator, brand, and retail network. This explains why a Panasonic TV and a private label retail TV can behave almost identically. The difference lies not in electronics, but in narrative, service, and market positioning. This is not a flaw of the system, it is its foundation. Now imagine another scenario. This time, we are not talking about a global brand with history and prestige, but about a large retail chain such as Auchan, Carrefour, or other European hypermarkets. For them, a television is not a brand-building product. It is a traffic generator. The retail chain starts with a simple business question. What television can we sell at the lowest price while keeping basic smart functions and acceptable image quality? No R&D department is created. No engineering teams design electronics. A spreadsheet appears. The spreadsheet contains numbers: maximum purchase price from the manufacturer, target promotional price, minimum store margin, logistics, and warehousing costs. With these requirements, the retail chain goes to an OEM manufacturer, very often Vestel. Vestel responds with a catalog of ready low-end platforms, proposing existing configurations: cheap mainboards, basic panels, minimal RAM and flash, simple casing. Nothing is designed from scratch. Solutions are selected from a menu. Then branding appears. The retail chain decides whether to create a new private label name, use an existing store brand, or design a neutral logo not directly associated with the chain. This step is psychologically crucial. The television must not look like a pure promotional product. It must look like a normal consumer electronics brand, even if it exists only on the shelf. After approval, Vestel launches mass production, handling assembly, basic testing, and logistics. Finished televisions go to the chain's warehouses. The role of Auchan or another retailer begins at the sales stage. The store places the TV at aisle ends, puts it on the front page of promotional leaflets, and offers it as the deal of the week. Margin on the TV itself is often minimal, sometimes almost zero. Profit is generated indirectly when customers buy other products. Quality control in this model is even more simplified than for global brands. The equipment must meet minimum standards, work stably, and not generate mass returns. There is no focus on fine-tuning image quality or long-term update strategies. Interestingly, the hardware in such TVs can be almost identical to models sold under known brands. The difference lies in configuration, after-sales support, and marketing communication. For consumers, this creates a paradox. A private label TV can be technically very similar to a Panasonic or Toshiba model built on the same Vestel platform. They differ in casing, name, service policy, and price. Retail chains use this model because it gives them full control over pricing and assortment. They do not negotiate with global brands. They buy ready electronics directly from OEM manufacturers and sell them under their own narrative. That is why store shelves are full of brands you cannot find anywhere else. They do not exist as technology companies. They exist as retail labels. In this sense, private label and branded TVs are two faces of the same system. One sells prestige, the other sells price. Both often come from the same factory. When we connect all these elements, the picture becomes surprisingly coherent. On the technological level, we see standardization. The same chipsets, mainboards, similar firmware, and identical hardware limitations make TVs from different brands behave almost the same. Differences visible to users are often cosmetic, related to interface, factory settings, and marketing presentation. On the business level, roles are divided. Vestel builds the platform and produces hardware at scale. Brands such as Panasonic take narrative, distribution, service, and reputational responsibility. Profits are unevenly distributed. OEM earns on volume, brand on retail price, and brand value. On the retail level, chains enter the game. For them, TVs are sales tools, not prestige products. They buy ready low-end platforms, assign logos, and sell them as weekly deals. Technologically, it is often the same Vestel behind more expensive branded models. The result is a system in which brand competition happens mainly at the level of packaging, price, and narrative rather than fundamental technological differences. This changes consumer perspective. When buying a TV, you increasingly do not choose unique engineering of a specific company. You choose an industrial platform configuration, panel type, system support, update policy, warranty terms, and service level. The logo stops being a guarantee of technological uniqueness. It becomes a marketing label attached to a global production system. That is why the question worth asking today when buying a television is no longer which brand, but rather which system stands behind this device. This question becomes even more important when we consider the political context. Vestel operates in a country balancing geopolitically. Turkey cooperates with Europe, maintains trade relations with Asia, and builds its own industrial independence. In the background, there are tensions with the European Union, migration issues, currency fluctuations, inflation pressure, and Middle Eastern regional instability. All of this affects production costs, supply chains, component prices, and OEM contract execution speed. European customers often do not see this context. They see a store shelf and a logo associated with Western quality. Meanwhile, real production increasingly happens outside Western Europe in countries operating at the intersection of political and economic blocs. Add to this consumer biases. Many European buyers still think in categories from 20 years ago. Japan means quality, Europe means solidity, China means cheap mass production. Turkey is often seen as an industrial periphery. Reality is far more complex. Today, a Japanese brand TV can be assembled in Turkey with Chinese components on a platform designed by a European OEM integrator and sold by a Western retail chain. This means purchase decisions stop being choices between countries and become choices between production organization models, between centralized Asian factories, regional Middle Eastern industrial hubs, and European logistics networks. In this sense, the TV in your living room becomes a small fragment of global industrial policy, not just a device for watching movies, but a physical result of compromises between cost, geopolitics, logistics, and the interests of major players. That is why today it is not enough to ask, is this a good brand? One must ask who really stands behind this device, in which system it was produced, and which interests shaped it.